This one is the uh, parts of transportation planning. Now uh, proceed to the economy and the service that is provided from that specific planning. You have to consider the four different levels or four different stages of transportation planning process. First of all, this planning process is discussed, and these are the four planning stages or four levels in the transportation planning, which we have to discuss in this purpose. That is, one is the transportation survey, data collection, and the analysis of all those collected data. Next one is use of transportation model, and obviously this transportation model is established from this collected data in the uh, previous point. That is, you have to collect data, and those data are collected by some transportation survey, and those data are analyzed, and then from these analysis transportation models are established. Transportation models means the all those specific mathematical and empirical equations and models, those are used to design the transportation and the traffic networks. All those things are actually transportation models. And after the transportation modeling, the present modeling, you have to think about the futuristic study, and for that the future land use forecast and alternative policy strategies you have to make. And future land use forecast means the future forecast of population and forecast of land use by the residential area, industrial areas, all those different areas, forecast of land use, and the required transportation services for futuristic consideration. That means in future this much of service is required from this transportation planning. You have to forecast that thing, and depending on that futuristic study, you have to make some futuristic policy or future strategies you have to make for upcoming future. And finally those policies are evaluated. That means you have to study, or you have to analysis if those future policies are right or wrong. These four stages of these four levels are actually considered for the transportation planning process. Now all these four stages are very much important, but the first two stages, that is transportation survey, data collection, and the transportation modeling, these two stages or levels are most important in case of your study, because these transportation survey and the process of data collection and different transportation modeling, there are different mathematical and empirical equations you have to study, and there are different numerical analysis you have to do for your exam purpose, as well as for your future purpose. Okay. And uh, coming to the survey and the data collection, actually I should write it as the transportation survey and data collection. And the data which are actually required is actually all the literature. These literature means the written documents which are available regarding this transportation planning process. Those are journey behavior pattern, maybe journey behavior pattern, nature, intensity of traffic, cost and benefits, that means the economy. All those written documents, those are already established. All those documents are you have to study for transportation survey. And sorry, sorry and traffic flow patterns within the different defined area is also essential in this survey, or you have to collect all those data for the transportation planning purpose. For this survey, these things you have to do, that is, one is zoning you have to do. The what is zoning and how zoning is done we'll discuss later, but actually zoning is done to define the trip generation. Trip means the total traveled path, that is actually trip generation means the origin of the trips. And mm, the total trip generation is actually you have to define, and that's why you have to do this zoning operation. That means you have to divide the total area. And this study is also one important survey for the transportation planning. And uh, before going to zoning, you have to collect some data by these two operation, that is that the operation is called interview, and you have to go for roadside interview and home interview. That means home interview means the origin of the trip, and roadside interview means at the throughout the path of the trip, and home interview means the at the point of origin of the trip. These types of survey you have to interview means obviously interview of the road user, that means who are using that transportation system or transportation service. You have to interview those road user or those transportation user. Now, now these kind of data you are actually required, that is socio-economic data, travel survey data, land use inventory data, and network data. Network means the road network data, which is actually pre-existing before going to the survey. Which those road network which is existing in that area, you have to collect that data also. Because after knowing that these kinds of data, you will go for the planning of the transportation system, or the required transportation service planning you have to do for future use, or that much of transportation service is required further. You have to conclude that thing after knowing all the, or after collecting all these data. Now these are the data you will have to collect. Socioeconomic characteristics of that area is actually in the head of socioeconomic data. That means income of the people in that area. Vehicle ownership means which kind of vehicles is actually, which kinds of vehicles are used by the people habitating in that area. Those are two-wheeler, four-wheeler, or the weight of the vehicle, or the loads that may be come from that vehicle. This type of data. Family size means the population of each of the families. These kinds of data you have to collect for this for under this head of socioeconomic data. Okay, and these data are required for these two important terms, that is trip generation and modal split models. We will discuss about trip generation and modal split models, but generally trip generation is, I have already discussed about trip generation briefly, and modal split models is actually splitting the path or splitting the trips for different zoning. We'll discuss about all these things later, but these are the data we require for this transportation process. Uh, and next is travel survey data. These are consist of origin, destination, travel survey, that means the starting point, and the destination, that means the end point of any road. These types of data. uh, these lines I will discuss later, what is cordon lines and field lines. And the important data which you have to collect is trips made by each of the member of the household, the direction of travel, the destination, the cost of the travel, etc. These are the important data you have to collect. Then land use inventory. These includes the data on the housing density, residential zones, establishments at the commercial and industrial zones. These types of data you have to collect under this land use inventory data. And network data is the transport network and the existing inventories, that I have already said that the existing transport network or road network you have to collect about that. And under that, the road network, traffic signal, junctions, these are under this topic under the road network or transport network. And the inventories includes the data on public and public and private transport networks. Sorry. These data we have to collect for the purpose of transportation planning. Okay, now